Greetings, Beatle people. This is John. Well, not that John. This John. I know it's been a while, but I'm finally releasing my new video, and it's on my favorite band, the Beatles. I'm going to talk about their influence on the world and also this new song. I hope you dig it. By the way, this is the way I really talk, unfortunately.
Well, first of all, I grew up in a home where my brother was 5 years older. So from the time I was literally conscious, I was hearing Beatles music. My brother was playing Beatles all day long, all day night. There was all day night. It's like Hard Day's Night, you know. Anyway, constant Beatles music. Then when I was 6 years old, I got some birthday money and I went out and bought my very first album. And the album I bought was the Beatles' Let It Be. And, you know, I already knew who they were, but I saw the cool pictures of them on the front cover. And I was like, yeah, those guys are cool. I've got to get that. So I did. I bought it, took it home and played it all the time. And when I was a kid, I actually had a pretty decent little stereo system with two speakers, and I would listen on headphones, and that's really how I learned about music, listening to every detail of that record and hearing the voices in the background. I knew everything that every one of them said when they're on the rooftop and when they're in the studio talking. And
Queen says no to pot-smoking FBI members.
I was just fascinated by them, their music, their energy, their vibe. I was captivated by the Beatles. And then flash forward to when I'm a teenager, I already knew how to play guitar. So it was kind of like a no-brainer. It's like, I got to make a band. So my friend Bruce and Scott and I, we made a band. So the Beatles really were the focus of my passion in terms of becoming a musician and going for it and wanting to do it professionally and learn how to write songs and how to produce and all those things. It was all about the Beatles. It was my love of the Beatles and my admiration of their incredible work. Because of my fanaticism over the Beatles, not only do I own every single possible thing you could imagine, multiple versions of each album, different mixes, bootlegs, a lot of the stuff you're hearing on these box sets, these brand new remix box sets, I've had those tracks for decades. All of the studio outtakes and all that stuff. I'm a fanatic, a real fanatic. I've been collecting as a fanatic for almost 40 years. I have every movie, anything they ever shot on video or film, I have that, even if it's in really bad quality. I'm a collector. I have a massive collection of amazing stuff. In 1995, when the Beatles announced they were going to do the Beatles Anthology, I was in heaven. I was flipped out. I couldn't believe they were going to do it because the impression that Beatles fans always got was that Paul and Ringo and George were friends by then, but didn't seem like they would. It was very likely that they would do a project together in the 1990s. But anyway, they did. They made this really very cool documentary, The Anthology. But while they were thinking about making music for the Anthology project, Yoko Ono gave George a crummy cassette tape. Now, on this tape was John sitting in his Manhattan apartment, essentially recording sketches of songs he was working on. They weren't intended to be released. They weren't even intended to be heard. It's when you're working on a song and you go, okay, oh yeah, I like what I'm doing here. I'm going to just record it real quick just so I remember it and I have kind of something to capture the place where it's at this point. That's really what these three songs were that were on the cassette tape that Yoko gave to George, Paul, and Ringo, which was recorded with just a cheap cassette tape recorder of the same quality that any of us would have had back in the 1980s. And if you listen to the original tapes, it's just him just plunking away and singing. The tape is noisy. It has a ton of hiss like this.
Some forgotten dream.
And what they essentially decided to do was finish these songs for John. They tried to use current technology, 1990s technology, to pull out some of the noise, the hiss, and the ambient sound that was on this crummy cassette tape. What they were trying to do was strip it down to just John's voice. Once they got it down to John's voice, then George and Paul and Ringo could add something to it and add their parts, and they could kind of structure it into a new Beatles song. If you listen to to the first song that they worked on, which was Free as a Bird. Every time John's voice comes in on that recording, you hear all that noise.
Once more around, pal. It's all pops and buzzes from here.
It's a very unclean and, to me, actually kind of unpleasant sound. That's because they couldn't free John's voice from all of the noise that was on the tape. And the same thing is in the second song they worked on, which is Real Love, which is a little bit better, a little bit cleaner, but still much the same thing. Every time John's voice comes in on that song, a whole load of noise comes with him.
All my little plans and schemes lost like some forgotten dream.
So flash forward. On this cassette of 3 songs, there was a third song, and that song is what we now know as Now and Then. As many Beatles fanatics know, that recording, that's been around for a long time, and so true Beatles freaks are not hearing this song for the first time. So with this new technology developed by Peter Jackson, they are able to now remove all of that noise, the tape hiss, even the piano John's TV was on in the background. They are able to literally wipe out all of that ambient noise and mess and just strip it down to John's voice.
I know it's true, it's all because of you. I know it's true, it's all because of you.
And it's really an amazing technology. Some people are freaking out about this marriage of AI and the Beatles. This particular form of AI, all it's doing is remembering a specific frequency range. It sort of focuses in on that and it draws that out and separates it from all the other noise on the tape. And I'm very excited about what can be done with it, especially live recordings. But let me now talk about the released track Now and Then. Being the great admirer of the Beatles that I am, I take their music very seriously because I consider them to be the greatest artists of the 20th century, and they haven't been topped yet. And I'm firmly convinced that they won't. There was just something happening with them, a combination of talent, intelligence, intuition, and magic. When you listen to those records, the magic just comes bursting out of those tracks.
1, 2, 3, 4!
She loves you, yeah, yeah, yeah. I need somebody. There are places I remember. Try to see it my way. Paperback writer. She said, ah, look at all the lonely people. Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Penny Lane. There is a barber showing photographs. It's getting better all the time. I read the news today, oh boy. We gave her most of our lives. I am he as you are, he as you are, me, and we are all together. While my guitar gently weeps, till I get to the bottom and I see you again. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Martha, my dear, though I spend my days in conversation, please. Blackbird singing in the dead of night. Sexy Sadie, what have you done? Love you forever and forever. She's well acquainted with the touch of the velvet hand, like a lizard on a window pane. The long and winding road. Don't let me down.
Out of college, money spent, see no future, pay no rent.
Something
And now back to your regularly scheduled program.
And now for something completely different.
This track, Now and Then, it bothers me that it's being sold as a Beatles track, because it's not a Beatles track. As I mentioned, I had this recording of Now and Then, John's original demo, years ago. And being a Beatles fanatic, I listened to every interview that's ever been done with George, Ringo, Paul, John. I've collected thousands of hours of interviews with those guys. I know I'm weird. It was really obvious to me in the interviews with George that were done after the Anthology project was released that George did not care for this song, Now and Then. And recently they're trying to frame it as if the reason why George didn't like the song is because it was too noisy, the tape. They couldn't get the tape into good enough condition to do it. But when you hear George talk about it in an interview, it's pretty clear he didn't like the song. When I heard the original John Lennon version of it years ago, I remember thinking that's probably something that he was just the germ of an idea that he was starting to work on, and that could be shaped up into something cool. I just don't think it's a very good song. I don't think the lyrics are strong. I do love the chords in it. It's got very Beatle-y, melancholy kind of chords to it. And I like the sound of John's voice too, especially now that they were able to draw it out and clean it up. It's quite lovely. But I do believe the reason why it was left to the third is because they all knew that it really wasn't that great of a song. It would have been cool if George and Paul were able to write sections for the song in the same way that they did with Free as a Bird. They actually write a good half of that song, the portions that they both sing in that track.
Whatever happened to the life that we once knew? Whatever happened to the life that we once knew?
I think it could have been a cool John song. I doubt very much John would have released it with the lyrics and the particular shape that it was in. I believe that John probably would have continued to go back to it and refine it because it's just not up to his level. It's just not. But cool, whatever. They wanted to finish it. George didn't want to finish it. Now, Beatles fans also know that George is a finicky guy, and he had enough of the whole Beatles thing decades ago, so it was a miracle that they got him to do Free as a Bird and Real Love. So it could have just been George on a grumpy day going, we're done, let's go. Maybe that was it. But when I heard George talk about it in the interviews, it didn't sound like that. It sounded like he really didn't dig the song. In fact, he said it quite boldly in not the nicest way. Not only did George not want to do it, but George really isn't on this track. He apparently is on rhythm acoustic guitar, which is shown, a snippet of that is shown in the new video. Paul and George both strumming the exact same rhythm part. I don't know if it's George. It could be a blend of Paul and George together. It could be all Paul. All I do know is that George's stamp as a guitar player is not on this song. It's not even a little bit. There's this tiny little kind of rhythm thing that pokes out a little bit here and there. George's fingerprints are not on this track. His vocals aren't on it. The two previous songs that had Paul and George doing these really lovely, very Beatles-ish background vocals, oohs and ahs and all that kind of stuff that made their original music so rich. There's none of that here except for what they lifted off of old Beatles recordings. They went back to songs like Here, There, and Everywhere and other tunes and just basically pulled old background vocals. So anyway, my point is George is really not on this song. He was not part of the effort to finish it. He really didn't give his stamp of approval on doing it. Now, I know this song has the approval of everybody, all of the extended families, and that's all that matters. I'm just sharing my opinion on this. I don't think it's legitimate to call it a Beatles recording, and I think it's disingenuous to call it a Beatles recording. I also know that there are very famous Beatles recordings that only 2 of them worked on, or that only 3 of them worked on. Okay, I know all that, but this doesn't feel right to me. It just doesn't feel like a Beatles recording. Paul played a slide guitar solo as sort of an homage to George, but it's nothing like a George guitar solo. It's something actually that I could have played. A million people I know could have played the exact same solo. It doesn't have that very, very unique flair and style of George Harrison's guitar playing. I actually think the song is quite lovely. What they did with it's touching to me in a certain sense. There's just something about it that does not feel right to call it a Beatles song. And I've never been disappointed in the Beatles before, nor disappointed by anything that has been released, including these new remixes, which I actually really love. I even love Magical Mystery Tour. The movie. I love that movie, and my Beatles friends and we all love it. You think the movie Help or Hard Day's Night is more Beatle-y? It's actually not. If you want to know what their sense of humor was really like, watch Magical Mystery Tour. Help and Hard Day's Night were scripted. That's sort of the fantasy Beatles. If you want to know really what they were like, watch Magical Mystery Tour. Magical Mystery Tour to me is brilliant. Steven Spielberg used to show it in his film courses at UCLA, and I saw it as like the precursor to Monty Python and that whole next wave of British comedy that was coming. So I love Magical Mystery Tour. I know it's rough and everything, but the heart of it, the comedic heart of it, is very, very Beatle-y. So going back to Now and Then, I'm disappointed that they just chose to market it and sell it as a Beatles song. I know that probably seems silly and stupid, and it probably is silly and stupid, but I'm just telling you how I feel. I can't listen to it and consider it a Beatles track. I think that Free as a Bird and Real Love are legitimate Beatles tracks because all of their input is on it. But this new song is essentially minus George Harrison. But having said all that, I do appreciate it as something that Paul and Ringo did because they love John and they wanted to kind of work with him again. In a sense, they wanted to hear John's voice in their headphones and feel that energy and that unique experience of working with John. I respect that. I do not like the music video. In fact, I dislike it greatly. It just doesn't have that Beatles vibe to it. It feels so technologically gimmicky and emotionally manipulative and sappy, corny, cheesy. I would use all those words to describe it. And the fact that the technology is so evident in every frame of it, that just makes those other elements all the more amplified and worse. And I love Peter Jackson. I admire him. I love his passion for the Beatles. I'm so glad he was in charge of Get Back and will likely be in charge of any future releases. By the way, he has said that there's 5 hours of footage when they were recording the White Album that's sitting at Apple, literally in film cans, untouched. I'm hoping that'll be the next thing. There's always got to be something from the Beatles. They're the gift that keeps on giving, right? That's what my friends and I call them, the gift that keeps on giving. To me, the Beatles, part of what makes them special is that they did come from another time, but the quality and integrity of what they did is so profound, you don't have to use modern technology to make them relevant in the modern age. They have been using that to make the Get Back film or to do these new remixes, but none of that is necessary. They're just kind of frosting on the cake. If the Beatles catalog was never remixed, people would continue to discover it and celebrate it for centuries to come. So those kinds of things, they're just kind of like a polishing or a refreshing. That music video is like, let's just use every tool in the technological book, bring the Beatles into the modern age. They don't need that. The Beatles were always about heart and soul and artistic passion. And this new music video feels like a marketing tool more than an artistic statement. And I just don't think it reflects the Beatles. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know that a lot of people just love it. And I know especially a lot of young people are so thankful to be able to experience a time when something new is coming from the Beatles. I wouldn't take that away from anyone. Everything that I do in terms of artistry is connected to them, because what they did was so special, had so much magic, passion, and excitement, creativity, and integrity, inventiveness, and fearlessness. I can't believe I've been making videos this long, and this is the first one I've done talking about the Beatles. It's crazy. Part of the problem is that I can't play Beatles music on my videos. Apple just shuts those videos down and blocks them. You can get away with about 7 seconds, and that's it. Thank you again to everyone who's been watching, commenting, giving me thumbs up, and subscribing. So until next time, this is John Blackstone saying cheers.
Here comes the sun.